Be here with you once again. And for those of you who are new to our live streams, welcome. And for those of you who have joined us before, I am super happy to have you back here with us. I'm Beatriz, and I'm part of the xgeeks team. For those of you who haven't heard about us before, allow me to just quickly present our company. So here at xgeeks, we mainly have two verticals of focus, which are e-commerce and cloud native. So we consider ourselves to be experts in terms of e-commerce by implementing from software as a service and licensed to tailored engineering, and in cloud native by unblocking agility and innovation in hybrid and multi-cloud projects. We at xgeeks represent what we believe to be the balance between product and project. If you are curious about our company, you should definitely check our social media and our website. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for more content. However, as we are entering summer, we will not be hosting more live streams until September. So this is the one you will need to be in so you don't miss out on it. But keep an eye on more content that we have planned for you all to enjoy during the summer. So this is going to be today a shorter presentation, however, by a very special guest, the one and only Guilherme Silva, that will be speaking to us about maximizing efficiency with Kubernetes in multi-tenancy. So I'm going to welcome Guilherme to the stage. So Guilherme, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Beatriz.
Great. So Guilherme, before I let you run the show, and you get the party started, I just want to remind everyone watching that you can leave all your questions in the comments section, and we will get to those questions at the end of Guilherme's presentation. And Guilherme, I will let you have the stage and continue with your awesome presentation.
Thank you, Beatriz. So, everyone, thank you for being present here in this live stream. Today, I'm gonna present you how can you improve your efficiency inside Kubernetes using a concept named multitenancy. But first, who am I? I'm Guilherme Silva. I have been working as a DevOps engineer since 2019, approximately, and with xgeeks since 2021. Currently, I'm working on a big leading automotive company. You probably all know it for sure. And also I'm a part of an xgeeks Academy where the scope is DevOps, where we train trainees to learn and to be a fully proficient DevOps. And also I'm very proud to be a mentor at that academy. So for today's agenda, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about Kubernetes, right? But mostly we're going to talk about the pains, the major pains that most of you guys who work with Kubernetes have. What is multi-tenancy? The benefits of it, some use cases applied to Kubernetes. How can we manage all those tenants in a multi-tenancy world? And the challenges, and last but not least, there are some tools out there already that can provide a quick and easy multi-tenancy for you. So everybody loves Kubernetes, right? And there are some features that we love, and that's why we use Kubernetes. For example, the scalability of it. Everybody loves how scalable Kubernetes is. The resilience. We also love that HPA and the automation, and overall the flexibility that all of this provides. And Datadog, the graph that I showed there, also mentions that. In the beginning of 2020, it was less than 40%, and now in the recent years, it's more than half organizations using Kubernetes for their containers. But nothing is perfect, right? And when the companies start to adopt Kubernetes, they face some pains, some major pains that if someone already used Kubernetes are very familiar with. For example, pain number one, bad resource management. You probably already have a situation where you have resources underutilized, or you have apps starving other apps. By number two, security risks. How can you be sure that your teams or your applications are applying the best security practices? And by number three, compliances. Same and very similar to the security risks. How can you be sure that your teams or your apps are providing and adopting the best policies or the policies that your company want? And overall, we got to by number four, operational complexity. This will increase your operational complexity. Your teams, your operation teams, infrastructure teams, whatever you want to call it, will get overloaded. Try to manage all these small pains. Yes, you can have some solutions, right? You can be everything cloud based. You can everything in the cloud, no problem at that, but your costs will increase. You also can do regular audits, but let's face it, this is not very time or resource efficient. And we also can be using our lovely custom scripts and tools that everybody loves to have, but everybody hates to manage. And if everything fails, you can increase your infrastructure team. You can contract external help that are proficient in Kubernetes to help you adopting Kubernetes to your company. But in the end, costs will also increase by a lot. So what if we introduce the concept of multi-tenancy? Let's use a building as an analogy. But first, a quick definition that I like to give on what is multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy for me is the ability of a system to support multiple tenants that share the same infrastructure while being isolated from each other. So let's use the building analogy that we have here. For example, the shared resources part. In a building, like tenants can share resources such as elevators, hallways, gardens, and stuff like that. Isolation. Even though they can share the above resources, everyone has an apartment for themselves, right? And they are isolated from each other. Yeah, they share the same building, but they must follow some rules and regulations so that they don't infringe on each other's rights. And last but not least, flexibility. Tenants can move in and out from the building and can reaccommodate or adapt the building in certain areas to different types of tenants. Let's now adapt this concept to Kubernetes. So, starting with the shared resources. In Kubernetes, we can have multiple teams or apps. It depends on your definition of tenant that you are using. And the tenants can use and share the resources of Kubernetes, such as the nodes, the storage, and the networking. Second, isolation. You can have, and you can start to have, basic isolation in Kubernetes between your tenants with the use of, for example, namespaces. It's very simple, basic first isolation that you can have, and then you can grow from there, like resource quotas, RBAC, network policies, and so on. Third, governance. You can, from the start, implement policies, compliances, and security profiles, let's say, that your tenants must oblige if they want to use your multi-tenant Kubernetes. And last but not least, the flexibility part. You have multiple tenants, right? And you want them to go in and out of your Kubernetes easily. You can, for example, use a new namespace as a way to implement a new application in your Kubernetes. and then you can change dynamically your namespace as well. Now, let's use this example on how can you implement a very basic multi-tenancy methodology in Kubernetes. Like, let's imagine that we have 2 single tenant clusters, and there is only one operations team or infrastructure team. And then you have team A and team B separate in these 2 single tenant clusters. Multitenancy is as easy as eliminate one of those clusters and adapt a new multi-tenant cluster to accommodate the both teams. These teams may seem that they are isolated from each other, but they are, with, for example, the basic isolation that I mentioned before. And this is very great, but what are the benefits of it? So, if you use less infrastructure, right, you have better resource utilization. You don't have the white space, which are underutilized resources. If you have better resource utilization, consequently, you have lower costs because you have less infra. Third, improved scalability. If you don't need to now, with improved scalability, you don't need now to provision a new cluster to a different team, to a new team, because now you have a single cluster that you can quickly add teams or applications, tenants in this case, and it's much quicker than provision new cluster with all the tools like cert manager, ingress controllers, and all that stuff that the guys use Kubernetes love. In the end, all of this will increase your operational efficiency because if you have less infrastructure to manage, your infrastructure team will be happier for sure. Now, moving to some use cases that we can use multi-tenancy, starting with startups. Startups in the beginning have budget limitations, right? They have low capital and they need to be efficient because they want to develop their idea. Then we can have something like this, a single multi-tenant cluster, very similar to the one that we saw before, okay? One cluster, multiple teams isolated from each other, starting with the best practices on security and compliances, using resources wisely. But if startups tend to grow, and they can become mid-sized organizations. Mid-sized organizations now have old code, like legacy code, and new modern code. And at the same time, they have multiple development teams. And the teams start to grow, a lot of people start to enter the startup, and then we might need to have something appropriate to accommodate these specifications. This is where we can have something like this, multi-tenant, multi-cluster. We can now use a control plane or a cluster management, like I mentioned there, that manages all the tenant clusters, okay? For example, you may ask, yeah, but now we are starting to grow in terms of clusters again. Isn't this what we are trying to avoid? Yes, true. But if you count the teams there, which are 9, okay, instead of having 9 single clusters, we now have 3. A decrease way better than having 9 clusters. And then the big boys, enterprises. The mid-sized organization can grow to become enterprises, and enterprises are a different kind of beast, let's say. And they have very specific conditions. Like, for example, let's imagine they need very secure and isolated environments. They have data that can only be run on a certain country. Let's imagine that we have data and workloads that can only be run in Japan, okay? Because of strict policies of Japan. We can now adapt the last example to have something like this: a multi-tenant, multi-cluster, multi-cloud architecture. We still have the same cluster management control plane, but now we have the tenants in different clouds or even on-prem, entering now a hybrid solution, let's say. Let's imagine that the confidential data that you have needs to run on the on-prem, fine, sure. And then you can have less sensitive data running on the most common cloud solutions that there are. As you can imagine, if you start to grow a multi-tenancy Kubernetes, you're gonna start to grow also the number of tenants. And it's very important to know how to manage tenants and what are the, in my opinion, the 5 essential things on to be aware of when managing tenants. Starting with the first one, which is obvious one, you need proper isolation. You don't want tenants to spoof other tenants, to look what they are doing. You want to have them separated as possible. Now, moving to the resource allocation. When using a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster, you need to make sure that you have enough space for new tenants coming into your tenant cluster, but also you have to make sure that you have enough space for present tenants, existing tenants in your Kubernetes cluster to grow inside your Kubernetes cluster. This is very critical because you don't want to block anyone, new and existing tenants. For the usage, well, this is also pretty obvious. We want to know what the tenants are doing in terms of resources usage so that you can know when to grow your tenant clusters. Security and compliance. From the start, you need to tell your tenants that they need to follow certain rules, certain security, that your clusters have. Also for compliances that your company may have. This is going to ensure that everyone is following the best practices from the start and everyone is on pair in terms of security and compliances. And last, and not least, tenant-specific configurations. You're going to have tenants that want very specific things, like, for example, secure isolated tenant clusters, for example, like the data confidential example. And you also need to accommodate your multi-tenant clusters to provide those solutions. Nothing is perfect in life, right? And challenges of Kubernetes multi-tenancy are out there, to be honest. Like, for example, allowing tenants to create CRDs, custom resources, is not a good idea because probably there's going to be a conflict with a tenant trying to use a certain version of a custom resource, and then another tenant wants to use another version, and they're going to conflict if you allow them to apply the CRDs. What you can do here is you can have a default version that all the tenants can use. Then you are responsible for the upgrade and the maintenance of these custom resources. Maintaining high availability and uptime. Since now that we have less clusters and we can have a big cluster with a lot of tenants, now we need to be more responsible, let's say, because a single failure in your Kubernetes tenant cluster can impact a lot of tenants. And so you need to be very careful when you do any maintenance or you do any upgrades in your clusters. Now, talking about upgrades, infrastructure upgrades can be tricky. Yes, some infrastructure upgrades can be tricky. For example, upgrading Kubernetes versions of the clusters. if there are deprecated API versions from one version to another, you need to coordinate very well with your team and with your tenants that those versions will be deprecated. And everybody needs to be on pair with that, because it's a big change that will affect everyone, basically. And the last one, you will have less clusters, yes, but your tenants will grow. And if your tenants will grow, your support will still be needed for those tenants. And your operations team can be the same size, but if your tenants continue to increase, you don't want your operations team or infrastructure team to be overloaded with support. So we need to manage that very carefully as well. And to finish, I just gonna bring you a quick example of Kubernetes multi-tenancy that it's out there, okay? There are several tools out there, you can search them. And today I'm gonna bring you one, which is called Capsule, which is a tool that creates quick and easy multi-tenancy, let's say, by using CRDs. On the left, we have an example of a simple CRD, okay, of a tenant, which name Meetup, and the owners are xgeeks. In this CRD, I keep it basic, but you can also declare like what namespaces can the tenant access, what ingress controls they can use, what are the resource quotas, and everything that you want to use to try to isolate your tenants the best. So we create a new CRD, a tenant called Meetup, and then in this CRD, you can create your namespaces. I created one called xgeeks Meetup, and then you can create your workloads there, a simple nginx, and then you can run your workloads in your namespace. But you, as the tenant, if you try to create a pod in any other namespace that does not belong to you, you can't, okay? And if you try to spoof other namespaces or try to see what the other tenants are doing, you can't as well. This is a very simple Kubernetes multi-tenancy in action inside Kubernetes. And yeah, that was it. Thank you very much for everything, for being here. And now, if we have questions, shoot it. You're mute, Beatriz.
That was valuable information that I should have had before, but thank you. But thank you. So as I was saying, again, thank you so much for being here. We didn't see many questions in the chat, but I'm sure people enjoyed your presentation. It's always nice to hear about new things and new technologies. So I just wanted to thank you for that once again. And I was also asking if it would be okay for people to later on maybe reach out to you in case any questions come up.
Yeah. If you want to, also, if you want to follow me, there's a QR code. You also have the presentation there, all the links to xgeeks, to my channels, everything is there as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again once again. It was a very nice talk. So we're also getting some positive feedback from everyone watching. So that's always nice to see as well. So then once again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I want to thank also, no problem, anytime. And I also want to thank everyone at home that took the time to be here with us today. As I mentioned before, we will be back in September with more interesting topics and other live streams. So I hope to see you all back in September. But in the meantime, don't forget to follow us on social media and keep an eye on other content that we'll be sure to share with you all. And thank you so much once again for being here today. Bye, everyone.